Welcome. I'm Sebastian Mahfood, and you're listening to WCAT Radio, the on-air wing of En Route Books and Media, bringing you the dulcet sounds of Catholic wisdom.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Welcome to The Open Door. Jim Hannock here, along with our friends, Mario Ramos y Reyes, John Breen, we hope, if he's not fighting a fire, and our special guest this morning, Leslie Klinger. Leslie is the vice chairwoman of the American Solidarity Party of California. We're going to begin, as we always do, with a prayer, Veni Sancte Spiritus. Come, Holy Spirit, fill the hearts of your faithful and kindle in them the fire of your love. Send forth your Spirit, and they shall be created, and you will renew the face of the earth. Lord, by the light of the Holy Spirit, you have taught the hearts of your faithful. In the same Spirit, help us to relish what is right, and always rejoice in your consolation. Gentle listeners, this week, inspired by Mario Ramos y Reyes, in particular his comments from last week when we discussed three of Peter Morin's easy essays. One, not a liberal. Two, not a conservative. And three, why I am a radical. In the course of that discussion, Mario said that we ought to put all of this in the context of what we take progress to be. And, well, here we are. We're going to discuss progress. Now, Mario very helpfully primed our respective pumps by giving us 4 questions to consider. And one of the questions has a link to it, a year in review op-ed by Nicholas Kristof in the New York Times. But we'll begin at the beginning, and we'll begin with Mario. And as always, Leslie, you can add your $10 worth.
Okay.
Never mind 10 cents or 2 bits. And I'll join in from time to time. And I see that John Breen is there. Tell us you're there, John. We see your...
Good morning, everybody.
Yes, he's very definitely here. Leslie Klinger has joined us. She's the vice chairwoman of the American Solidarity Party of California. And she's the one you see on your screen. The rest of us have been reduced to little circles. Now, I'm going to depart just for 3 seconds here to chide John Breen, because he had promised that he would put his picture up. And Christy Yao was especially interested in seeing John Breen's picture. But I see that's still on your to-do list, John?
Yeah, that's true. It's been a busy week here.
As our lives lengthen, so do our to-do lists. Well, all right now, Mario, this is right in your laps. What is progress?
Well, good morning, everyone, again. The idea of progress comes because there has been, over the past 100 and so years, that after the Industrial Revolution, in the midst of the 19th century, there was an idea that humanity was marching toward a paradise, a plenitude, fulfillment, whatever word you might want to use in that sense, in that direction. And that word was summarized with the term progress, usually was written with capital P. So there was a sense of optimism in U.S. and also in some countries around the world, that we are marching toward certain fulfillment. Now, we can trace back and explain the philosophical background of that. I don't think it's necessary, but generally, the idea was that through science and the implementation of scientific policy, we would get to that ideal state of progress. Now, originally, in this context, progress meant material progress. The progress that we achieve through empirical sciences, through technology, economic development, and so on. In other words, there was a sense that this term progress meant explicitly material progress.
Right.
And we were marching necessary to that goal. So now the question is, if we are human beings which are marching toward our destiny, is that meaning of progress our goal, or there is something else? And just final point, going back or make more concrete, after reading the very interesting piece by Nicholas Kristof in the New York Times, he used the word progress in the sense, precisely in this sense, that progress meant, or mean by his explaining progress in the sense that we have achieved this year the best ever flourishment, if you will, in different areas. With all of these areas are material dimension of human existence, such as the economy, electricity, water, etc., etc. So that, I think, was this is my brief introduction to the topics.
Leslie, did you have any thoughts as Mario was giving us the context of our discussion today?
I did. And first of all, thank you, Mario. And thank you all for inviting me to be a part of this discussion. One of the things that I was thinking of when I was reading the op-ed piece, and excuse me, I'm fighting one of those colds that is making its way through the Central Valley right now. It's like everybody has one. Was again, the way that we define our terms. And I think that they make a very good argument. If the definition of progress is simply that we have advanced all over the world in sort of a general way in material ways. Absolutely, more people have access to clean water, more people have access to electricity, more people have access to healthcare the world around than ever before in human history. And that certainly is a definition of progress, and there's nothing wrong with that. However, if you're someone like me who's not just a Catholic, but is also a member of the Dominican order, I'm a lay Dominican, we look at progress in a different way. And so the way that I would define progress and the way that I would define my walking towards destiny, my personal destiny and the destiny of human beings would be that my destiny is to be in full communion with God. And so while it is wonderful to have these material things, I'm certainly not going to turn down having electricity. I don't want to turn down having a safe place to live and access to health care and all of those things. Ultimately, my progress is going to be judged in a different manner than it is by the rest of the world. And that is simply because of the way that I'm going to define it. So if I'm defining progress and my ultimate destiny as full communion with God, then I have to look personally, first of all, is whether or not I have moved forward in that destiny. What's my prayer life like? How am I relating to the people around me? What am I doing to be not just Catholic, but Catholic out loud, which is what I'm required to be if I accept the responsibilities of my baptism and confirmation. then as a citizen of the world, what happens is that I have to plug my phone in because I've got low battery. Sorry, guys. What happens then for me is that I have to ask myself whether or not I am being the person that I'm supposed to be as a citizen of the world, and as a citizen of the United States, as a citizen of Stanislaus County, as a citizen of Modesto, so forth and so on, to not only provide and nourish the people around me as part of those corporal works of mercy, but also how am I supporting their progress towards what I consider their destiny? And their destiny is the same as mine, because I believe that all human beings' ultimate destiny is to be in full communion with God. So how am I contributing to that? And while I think the material progress is definitely important and can certainly add to that, that's kind of the it's sort of the blueprint for missionaries all over the world, isn't it? It's first you make sure that you're feeding their bodies, and then you can feed their souls. They're going to be more willing to listen to you if they know that you've got food on the table for them and a safe place to live. You can't separate the two.
Thank you very much. What you've done is move us to the questions that come right after our first question. First question, what is progress? And then you say, toward what?
Mm-hmm.
Where? And of course, for all our progressive friends, we might ask them, well, what makes progress progressive in the deepest sense? I wonder if John could join us now and offer some thoughts. John, we're poised. Are you going in now?
Yeah, I'm right here. I was just getting off of the mute button here.
I know. That's what we always are working at.
So that's one instance where I'm not really progressed, is that I'm not able to strap my thumb around technology here. So I think that's one strike against me in the progressive sense. I think with most people, if you ask them what progress is, you're gonna get like basically a subjective opinion of what progress is. Some people may chalk it up to something that's strictly material, and some that would chalk it up to strictly spiritual. And I think there's an argument of both, and I think that it's supposed to. I think progress is the proper implementation of both on the individual level. So. That's kind of like my summed up, truncated, super truncated answer to what the progress is. I think it's ultimately the betterment of the individual, on his spiritual and his temporal state, which should have a trickling effect into his community, the world that he lives in, and those around him. So. I haven't really given a whole lot of thought to that, but that's just the thoughts that are jumping off of my head right at the moment.
Well, I think all of us could give more thought to this question, and after we give it some thought, given that we're human beings, we'll forget what we thought pretty soon, and we'll need to rethink it. Let me go to the second question with an anecdote. My daughter is one who gets up early. Like Leslie, she's a teacher. Like Brian Carroll, she's a teacher in junior high. Her focus is on math and science, and that's not a focus that's shared by many, if any, of her students. Now, to get launched in the morning, she used to drink tea, but that hasn't been enough. She has switched to coffee. And with the switch to coffee, she's accumulated a number of extra large cups. And the most recent coffee cup has a charming little picture of someone on a charming little bicycle holding a bouquet, a manageable bouquet of flowers. And we read under that, life is a journey. Now, the question is, I guess for us, how we make this journey. One of the ways we could begin to consider how we make this journey is, do we make it as pilgrims or as wanderers? And I know that John, I'm not going to let him off the hook at all. John is a friend of someone from a very much earlier generation, Aristotle. And Aristotle is fond of and highly recommends that we reason with a direction about our reasoning, that we have a telos, a goal in mind. So you may or may not feel the inspiration of Aristotle, but John, what's this distinction? Making our journey as pilgrims?
I'm sorry, I got a poor connection.
You're not catching this. Okay, then it's going to go to Mario because he started off, and it's back to his turn. Mario, you're as much a friend of Aristotle as John is, and that takes us to Aristotle's theme of telos, or point, or purpose. In the journey of life, what kind of role does telos, purpose, play? Or maybe it shouldn't play any role. Maybe we should just wing it, as some people do.
Well, let me tell another story, which is related to your question about the telos, or the teleology of human experience. In my classes, in one of my classes, generally, I assign a reading to young freshmen, and the reading is about Barabbas. And it's a novel written in the 1950s by a Swedish author, Nobel Prize winner, 1953-54, Per Lagerkvist. This writer wrote a novel about the life of Barabbas, the criminal who was free, and Christ took his place, and so on. So it's an imaginary account of Barabbas. When you read the novel, you see Barabbas searching for happiness. Barabbas searching for the one who died in his place. And Barabbas go in the novel through different stages of his life, very difficult situation, another stages. In another stage, he's very pleasant and so on. So much so that he's searching for the one who claimed have risen from the dead. And he didn't know he was, but he was looking for him. To make a long story short, he followed the risen Christ to Rome, and ultimately he is executed. And he's executed even though he was not a Christian, officially speaking, but yet he was searching for that fulfillment. So what is the moral of the story, if you will? Well, every reader can get his impression, I think. But ultimately is that human life is a journey toward some happiness which is written in our heart, and we do all our best to figure out what it is, and we are searching for that, try to look at the sign of reality toward that goal. So ultimately we are searching for quote-unquote progress, in the sense fulfillment not only of the material condition but also of our own emotional and psychological well-being. So going back to your basic question, there is a teleology there, which we are looking for ends? The answer is yes. And that can be written in anyone's heart because we share the same nature, the same human condition. So the question then is how then we make aware that there is something more than material goods, that we are not just our wanderers that are looking for that happiness anywhere, rather than we are looking for that destiny which will give us this plenitude. So we are ultimately pilgrims, where our journey is not as easy. It's not easy either, but at the end, we have a goal.
Definitely not just wanderers. Where we're going makes a huge difference. And let's see if John can join us again.
Sure. I think I very much agree that that we are pilgrims as opposed to wanderers. Each person that has ever existed, they have a vocation in one way or another. So just by virtue of that, we really can't be wanderers in the fullest sense of the word. Since we have a goal in life, we may have to wander a bit just to find it. And that's like the whole discernment process that may be referred to as wandering. But if you know that you have a goal in life, that you are created for a purpose, and the purpose is ultimately beatitude with God, but also bring about God's kingdom on earth, then you can't really say that you're a wanderer, but you are more of a pilgrim amongst many other pilgrims. So we are pilgrims on a journey. And the journey is towards heaven.
Yes, indeed, and I think that we're all in accord with that. Let me do a little bit of Aristotelian background here because it's on my mind. There's often a distinction made between being active and being reflective. And classically, it's the distinction between being active and being contemplative. And I think that if you were to talk to a lot of people today, they might say something like, well, I haven't got time to be contemplative. And once when I was contemplative, I remember once when I was contemplative, it was kind of dull, and I wanted to get back into action. But Aristotle says that the whole idea of acting is to get someplace, and someplace that's the best place. And when you're in the best place, you are struck with awe and admiration. And that in the end, if there is to be an end, it is the end of contemplation. Now, Leslie was telling us that she's a Dominican. And I wonder if this might not be a good time to explore this Dominican motto, contemplata ab alis tradere. Is that it?
Very good. Yeah.
Well, what does that mean, and how does that fit with this discussion?
Okay. Well, let's back up a little bit. We're looking at the question, which is, do we make the journey as pilgrims or do we make it as wanderers? And once again, as somebody who just loves to put distinctions into distinctions.
Good. Distinguished to unite.
Okay. If I wanted to reword that question, it would be this way. Should we make the journey as pilgrims or should we make it as wanderers? Because I think that the reason I think there is a difference, and one of the things that I think kind of characterizes modern life right now is that people don't know there's a difference between the two things. And oftentimes a wanderer thinks they're a pilgrim. So let me use myself as an example. I was raised by a single mother who is a faithful Catholic, whose attitude towards motherhood was, it doesn't matter if he, meaning my father, was not going to keep his vows. That doesn't mean I don't keep mine. And so she saw her vocation as motherhood, and she expanded that through necessity to having to get a job, having to be successful at her job, and at the same time raise her children. So one of the things that she did as part of raising her children was she provided us with a first-class education. So I did 12 years of Catholic school. I don't think I'm recovering from that in any way. I loved going to Catholic school. I thought it really gave me a good foundation. But like a lot of kids in the 1970s that were coming up, the world had a strong allure at that time. And so for many years, I lived a life that was not in any way, shape, or form compatible with the precepts of the Catholic Church, and certainly flew in the face of my faith tradition. And one of the reasons I did that is because I had an illness that I wasn't even aware of, and that illness is that I'm an alcoholic. And so today I'm an alcoholic in recovery. And one of the ways that I chose to do my recovery, besides abstinence from alcohol, was through a 12-step program. And that 12-step program is, as most people probably know in a general sense, is spiritual in nature. And that spirituality requires you to find a power greater than yourself. And ultimately, for me, reconnecting with that power greater than myself led me back to the Catholic Church. So I was a wanderer for many years, but I would not have characterized myself in that way because I didn't know what that meant. So coming back to the church about, a little over 25 years ago, what that helped me do was rediscover my purpose in life and rediscover what my destiny is ultimately, or what my destiny should be. And so, therefore, I went from being a wanderer, somebody that was really just looking to feel better. If that makes any sense at all to anyone, I'm hoping there's somebody out there listening to this that will catch what I just said. I just wanted to feel better, because when I was just me, just Leslie, and there was no God in my life, and there was nothing going on in my life that could be considered spiritual in nature, I didn't feel good. I felt horrible. I was scared all the time. The best way to describe it is my shoulders were up around my ears all the time. And when I drank, I was able to take a deep breath and my shoulders came off my ears. And so when I discovered a way to deal with alcoholism, I had to find a way to keep my shoulders off my ears without drinking alcohol. And I found that through a pilgrim's progress towards my destiny, that destiny being full communion with God, full communion with my Creator. Okay, so now that brings me back to your question about the Dominican spirituality. Okay, so the motto that you talked about means not just to contemplate, but to share the fruits of our contemplation with others. So it's sort of a contemplation in action kind of thing. We do not believe in the spirituality of the Dominican order. What we believe is that you don't just contemplate God for the virtue of contemplating God. We contemplate God so that we can learn more about how to share truth with others. And then we have an obligation as the order of preachers to share that truth with others. And so we look at different things. We look at things differently, I would say, than a lot of people. In many ways, we are an extension of the ancient rabbis who believed that studying scripture, studying the Torah, was in and of itself prayer. And so for us, it is the same thing. We study not just so that we can study. We study so that we can be in communion with God and we can share what we've learned, how we relate to truth to those around us to help them get closer to truth. That's the whole purpose of being a Dominican. So when I look at a question like this, life is a journey. Do we make the journey as pilgrims or wanderers? I immediately sort of changed the question because I've been both. And the question becomes, should I be a wanderer? Because there are going to be people in our society today that make it a virtue to just sort of be wandering around out there and looking at various different things. I really enjoyed one time listening to a lecture being given by Bishop Robert Barron, where he said, if you do not accept that Jesus is Yahweh moving among us, then he gets relegated to being just another really cool spiritual answer to something. It'll be like, isn't Jesus and his philosophy great? Aren't the Sufi mystics wonderful? Don't you like those Buddhists? Isn't it great? And you see a lot of that today where people will say, well, I'm not religious, I'm spiritual. And essentially what they're saying is that they like the really nice parts of all the different religions and philosophies that are out there, but they don't want to make that amazing commitment that will come when somebody says, oh my gosh, Jesus was not just a historical figure with a lot of really neat things to say. Jesus Christ is God stepping into time and space and moving around us, moving among his creatures. Once a person comes to that understanding, you've got a choice to make. And that choice becomes, do I give myself intentionally and purposefully, completely to him and do follow him to the best of my ability? Or do I run away from that? Because to give yourself completely to him means essentially saying to the rest of the world, what you're going to tell me is important is not nearly as important as what I once thought it was. It's never going to be as important to me again as what I once thought it was. So to give an example of how my life has changed, because since I've become a pilgrim as opposed to a wanderer, and this is just a joke, but it'll give you an idea. In 1974, I slept in the Cow Palace parking lot for 3 days in order to be up front for the Rolling Stones concert. Because in those days, there was the seating was what they called stadium seating, and you just had to rush for the stage. So for 3 days, I slept in the parking lot just so I could be there. So very recently, they have announced that they have a new tour coming up. Now, listen, I'm still a Rolling Stones fan. I love rock and roll music. So they announced these tours, and they said that one of the places they're going to be at is Levi Stadium. And they gave the date as to when they're going to be here. And my first thought was, oh my God, I could go to that show. And then I looked at the date and I realized, no, I can't go to that show. And the reason I can't go to that show is because on the same date they're going to be performing, I'm going to be ushering about 70 little kids through the Spanish liturgy to receive their first Holy Communion. And as soon as that is done, I'm getting in the car to drive up to Reno to speak at a conference for my 12-step program. Now, I'm sorry, but you don't get from somebody sleeping in the dirt for 3 days to that in a relatively short period of time, unless you are changing the focus of your life from being a wanderer to a pilgrim. Today, I would proudly say that's what I am. I'm a pilgrim. And what my job is to do is to make sure that I can bridge the gap between those people who are making a virtue out of being a wanderer and perhaps showing that that's a waste of time. But being a pilgrim will restore your purpose and orient you again towards your destiny.
That's what I call a powerful testimony. And to use a term that I really don't completely understand, but it's a term that popped into my mind, would you say that in a Dominican way you are woke?
I guess I don't quite understand that either. You know, I don't really understand what it's meant by that. I'm guessing what it means is that that I've just become aware of who I really am, and I'm no longer afraid to embrace that, and I'm not afraid that I'm going to upset somebody by telling them that. That being said, I also believe as a Catholic that it is extremely important that when I share this information with people, I do so with love and with gentleness. I don't need to hit people over the head with something, but I can be strong about it, if that makes any sense. So, you know, again, it's learning to navigate in the world and learning to navigate in the world as a pilgrim and learning that being a pilgrim is fine, but it also means you're going to lose people that don't want you to either be on that journey or don't want to join you on it.
Thank you. Now, I'm going to go back to John because I want to know if he experiences navigation issues where he is with the people that he is with the work that he is doing. I know he's a very committed Catholic, and I just wonder about this navigation question. Here he comes again. Here she comes again. Or now, how could we approach people in the best way, John?
I would say in my own case, I would still want to maintain my pilgrim status, even though, like you said, which is not uncommon to people of my age or my status, that there are navigation issues where you're trying to decide what's the next step. And kind of what I was saying a little earlier about sometimes you can consider the whole discernment process in praying. What's the next step? Some people may want to describe that as a bit of a wandering sort of way, but it's not wandering in the sense that it's completely clueless. You're trying to figure out through your prayer and discernment, and hopefully that we are all doing that, of what's the next step. So this kind of limbo, you might say, of uncertainty. Some people may describe that as a bit of a wandering sort of a way. So that was the only way that I was using that word. In my own.
Well,
Sure,
go ahead. Go ahead, John.
Just in my position, I've already finished college. I've graduated, so I'm kind of in the discernment process of what's the next step to go to. And like people are applying for jobs and whatnot, and I'm doing that too. But you might say that's a bit of a navigational issue as well. Issue in the sense that you're trying to figure out what's the next step and what direction the Lord is taking you. So, yeah, I'm experiencing that, but I'm doing my best to maintain my family. There's a lot of opinions, so I'm always going to be subject to that. So I'm not too worried about the future. As long as we keep our heads together, we listen to each other, and we keep prayer at the foremost.
There's a wonderful hymn by Cardinal Newman. Actually, he wrote it before he was even a Catholic, and it begins with "Lead, kindly light, lead, kindly light." Now, Mario, on this navigation theme, which can be taken in different directions, you mentioned your students and picking a book for your students to read. How is it that you navigate with your students with regard to your believing that we're here on pilgrimage, and many of them perhaps thinking in terms more of wandering and delighting in wandering?
The fact that I'm assigning a book as an instrument is that to show everyone that we share the same journey. We are on the same journey. Perhaps I may be ahead of them because my age, more experience, but we are on the same path because we are human beings and we are in history. We are historical beings which are moving forward, physically, spiritually, etc. In other words, my initial provocation to them is that we are all pilgrims in one way or another. Everyone is a pilgrim because we share the same condition and we look for the future. Now, granted, some of them may see the future as a material progress. That will be the goal. But then in this journey, we explore together with certain question whether material progress will be all that there is. Is that what fulfills you in your own happiness? So in that sense, we go together, try to explore that our pilgrimage ultimately need to be fulfilled for something else other than material beings. And in other words, we journey somehow guiding in some ways to our own freedom. And by provoking them, the word provocation here I think is key, because in some ways I try to be proactive in their own vocation by raising questions, just raising questions. I don't provide answer to them so that they are the protagonists of their own history. And I think that is a way by which, as I understand, in the contemporary context, is more appropriate, because we are not forcing anyone to do anything other than stimulating them to follow their own condition as human being. And human being, if Aristotle is right, and I think he is, we are searching for happiness. The fulfillment, and when you read Aristotle's account of happiness, all the ingredients of happiness, etc., you see that there is a material component. So that when I read, after reading Kristof's piece, he's right in some aspect, because material condition in our journey, yes, they are necessary. Now, the question is that sufficient? That's another question. If I were to talk to Kristof, I would say, well, is that sufficient? Why is that then that many people feel uneasy, even though they have all these goods? Why is it my student who have all these goods still feel completely uneasy and they're looking for something else? Why? Because there is an ambivalence. And I will introduce this term which Jacques Maritain used very wisely. There is an ambivalence in this march toward progress between good and evil, between what give us plenitude and somehow that the evil that is in reality. There is some march which is conflictual, if you will. So going back to my example, the novel that I assigned them, say, well, that was perhaps the portrait of this novelist about Barabbas. So he was looking for, well, fame, be free, etc. But at the same time, he was not able to somehow not be aware that he was looking for something else. Now, that's his imaginary account, yes. But the fact that the Lahervich, who was the author, Nobel Prize winner, was completely agnostic, showed that this thirst for happiness is in everyone's heart. And I tried only to be a witness, say, hey, there is something else. There is not only material good. There is something else. There is something else. It's a witness. And I think that is my view on this journey.
Let me make a couple of connecting points here that Mario calls to mind. He is being Socratic, he says, with his students. He's just raising questions. And yet, we know what happened to Socrates, don't we? Questions can be very unsettling. And I'm all for raising them, and raising them in a persistent way, as was, I think, Jacques Maritain. And a connecting point here with Maritain, whom Mario just mentioned, and Leslie, is that Maritain was a profound student of the great Dominican, Thomas Aquinas, and he, writing in the 20th century, Maritain drew heavily on Dominican thinkers of his own time and of earlier times. Well, at any rate, we have enough connecting points here to look at number 3, I think. We're already partway into it. Maritain recognizing that we are historical creatures, as Mario pointed out. Maritain thinks that if we look at various points of history, we'll usually find a moving forward, and we'll also find elements of degradation. In the Council, the Vatican Council, Second Vatican Council, the famous expression was used repeatedly that we have to look at the signs of the times. And when we look at the signs of the times, we're going to find positive and we're going to find negative, it seems to me. And it's not as if, being fair to Nicholas Kristof, it's not as if he doesn't acknowledge that there are negative forces. In fact, his second little mini paragraph here is, I have an antidote to gloom. He recognizes that there are dark patches. But I'd like to suggest that even in his discussion, there are considerations that he doesn't mention at all. One consideration that occurred to me is that again and again, there have been discussions and analyses of the phenomenon of slavery. And we can point to all sorts of material advances, but we also ought to acknowledge that there are more slaves today than there ever have been at any particular point in human history. So that we should have all these advances plus more slaves. This seems like something from ancient Rome. Well, it isn't. That's something that we have to consider. And then he says nothing at all about what really is an ongoing reinvestment and a deepening commitment to the use of nuclear weapons or the preparation to use nuclear weapons. It's interesting with all caps that Pope Francis has said that even the possession of nuclear weapons can't be justified. And I think the argument is simple enough. If it's always wrong intentionally to kill the innocent, and by their very nature, the use of nuclear weapons is killing the innocent, how can it not be wrong to intend to use nuclear weapons and to spend millions and billions of dollars to prepare to use nuclear weapons if your enemy sufficiently provokes you? And then also there's no mention in Kristof of the fragmentation of family life. This fragmentation of family life takes many forms, and one form I think that it takes is that when we have the normalization of so-called same-sex unions, we're treating really a disordered union as if it were analogous to the traditional family. And it seems to me that it's not analogous. It's not analogous at all. It's just a profound distortion. And one last point, this is on the invisibility of the unborn and the preborn. In the fourth little mini paragraph, he celebrates access to family planning. Well, I'm a friend of Dominicans, but more than a friend of Dominicans, I'm a member of the lay Missionaries of Charity. And Mother Teresa's Missionaries of Charity have tried to provide family planning in terms of natural family planning. But I suspect that what Nicholas has in mind is not natural family planning. He has in mind an understanding of family planning that extends to abortion. And what we have now worldwide, every year, in the neighborhood of 45 million abortions. So there's no expansion of life expectancy there at all. Nor do you find the increasing violations of religious freedom. Right. I think it's been some time since religious freedom was so much in jeopardy as it is now. So my point is that he does call our attention to things that we should rejoice in. And it is just an op-ed, but it's just the sort of op-ed that you would expect to find in the New York Times. And it's not the sort of op-ed on the state of things in 2018 that would be written by either a Dominican or a missionary of charity, or I suspect a recent graduate of Holy Apostles College and Seminary. And I know that Mario wouldn't have written this either. So that's my way of jumping into question number 3. Maritain's point that in any given chapter of history, there are powerful points of advance and powerful movements of degradation. End of my rant. What do you think, panelists?
May I start?
Of course.
Oh, okay. All right. So I really look at question number 3. Okay. And the point that is being made by the question is there's nothing going on today that we have not experienced before. When he says that at certain points of history, there's a movement of degradation, and at other times there's a movement of progress, once again, it's the definition of both of those things. You just named, through the op-ed piece, some things that other people are going to see as progress, that the rest of us, those of us who are faithful Catholics or faithful Christians, are going to not see as progress. Okay, we're going to see those things as degradation. So I think that there is absolutely a value to being able to do two things. And that is a point that Mario brought up, which is to recognize that we are people in history, that we are in a particular time, in a particular place, and that what is going on here is happening. We're not just on the sidelines. This is something that we're a part of. But we also need to remember that this is not something that we have not, as a group, faced in the past. One of the things that I think is really interesting in my life right now, I share a home with my mother. She is still alive. She's 97 years old. This last Yeah, isn't that awesome? So, and she's completely present in the world. There's nothing wrong with her brain. She's doing really well. About 4 or 5 years ago, because she now had the time, she's no longer raising children or grandchildren, she started doing a lot more reading in her faith tradition. And one of the things that she read was, she picked up, or I got for her, was The Devout Life by St. Francis de Sales. And she was about halfway through the book, and she made a comment to me, oh my God, I should have started doing this a lot earlier, right? It's like, oh my gosh, this is a lot to do. And I'm doing it, I'm reading about it now, and I'm 94, right, at the time. But the reality is that what she was seeing something that had been written, many, many, many years ago, applying again to their life, to life today. And so I think that it is important for us to look backward in a certain way and look at how the church and how saints approached certain things, approached the degradations of their time, because it's very similar. Catherine of Siena, her letters are amazing to look at, including the letters that she wrote to people who were suffering from same-sex attraction, and her advice to them, her urging to them, her understanding to them that what they were dealing with is a cross, and to look to the graces that the sacraments give one when they decide to carry that cross with grace, dignity, and their heads held high. we have to accept the fact that we are not going to be palatable to a lot of people for a long time, but that this is not the first time in world history that this has happened. And so it behooves me as a Catholic, as a woman, and as a Dominican to understand history, but also to stay true to what the course of true progress really is. One of the things that I think is very sad is that a lot of our younger people who are real big, I should say, and I don't want to use this in a way that sounds like I'm putting them down, but they're sort of Catholic talk show hosts, Catholic pundits, Catholic whatever, always speak to things going on today as though those things have happened in a vacuum. And they will then use a broad term to kind of condemn stuff. Oh, those feminists, they're just awful, those feminists, right? And oftentimes when I'm getting in discussions with people that are in their 30s and 40s and they're faithful Catholics, I will ask them if they understand how feminism in this country rose to such prominence as it is today. And one of the things that I will suggest to them is that it was the horrific experience of a lot of women because the men in their lives fell down on the job. And so what they saw was that true freedom would be the ability to act like immoral men. They saw that as freedom. And just giving them that idea to think about sometimes changes the way that they then approach young women today about how we're going to honor them as women and truly give them choices that they can make about their futures. One of the reasons why I am as active as I am in things like the Silent No More campaign is because I resent the fact that the far left seems to resist the idea that giving women complete information about fetal development or what happens to you after you've had an abortion and all the problems that could be faced with that somehow giving them that information is a bad thing, right? And so to me, it infantiles them. It makes us little things that have to be protected. Don't show a woman an ultrasound. She may choose not to have an abortion. Well, this to me makes me less than a person. You're saying that I'm not intelligent. You're saying that I'm not able to make a good choice. When I handed that kind of logic to somebody who is thinking about running for the Senate in California, and he said something about, well, I'm very much pro-life, but at the same time, I don't want a woman to say to a woman what she can and cannot do to her body. When I gave him that kind of reasoning, he was stopped dead in his tracks. His whole thought process started to change because he suddenly was saying, wait a minute. So what you're saying is if we are allowing women and men to have complete information about something, then they can make an informed choice, and we cannot be afraid of that choice. If they choose, for instance, to not get an abortion, that's their choice. That's a good thing. So what do I mean then, when I say we have to look at certain points in history, as Maritain points out, we have to ask ourselves, how do we insert ourselves and our belief systems into this time in history? Let's look to the past and see what mistakes were made. Let's see what was done in a good way. I'm looking today in the church, in particular, I'm praying for another Catherine, another Teresa of Avila to rise up, to open her voice, to say this is what needs to be done, because I believe that that's the kind of thing that is going to lead us back into a time of a movement of true progress. And that's what I'm hoping for today.
I think we share those hopes. And as I mentioned to Leslie earlier, we come to the end of our hour before we even know we're getting that close, and we are at the end. So I'm going to close with a prayer, and it's the gospel in the liturgy for today, gospel according to Luke. It happened that there was a man full of leprosy in one of the towns where Jesus was, and when he saw Jesus, he fell prostrate, pleaded with him, and said, "Lord, if you wish, you can make me clean." Jesus stretched out his hand, touched him, and said, "I do will it. Be made clean." And the leprosy left him immediately. Then he ordered him not to tell anyone, but go, show yourself to the priest, and offer for your cleansing what Moses prescribed. That will be proof for them. The report about him spread all the more, and great crowds assembled to listen to him and to be cured of their ailments. But he would withdraw to deserted places to pray. Gospel of the Lord. Amen.
Amen.
We've come to a close. We look forward to next week. Thank you to all our panelists.
Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed the program and will join us back for another show on WCAT.